The morning sun peeked through the blinds of the Oakland Police Department as Captain Anderson adjusted her badge in the mirror. Her reflection showed more than just a police uniform. It showed 15 years of determination, countless solved cases, and a trail of broken barriers. As one of only 3 black female captains in the department's history, she had earned every stripe on her shoulder through pure grit and excellence. Her colleagues often joked that she practically lived at the precinct, and some days that wasn't far from the truth. Captain Anderson's office walls told her story. Framed commendations sat alongside community service awards, and a wall of thank you cards from local residents reminded her why she chose this path. Her favorite was a crayon drawing from a little girl she'd helped reunite with her lost puppy last summer. The captain's morning routine included walking through her precinct, greeting each officer by name, and knowing about their families. Officer Chen was expecting his first baby. Officer Rodriguez's son had just made the baseball team. These personal connections were her secret weapon in building the strongest community relations record in the city. That morning, she had just finished reviewing applications for the youth mentorship program she'd started 3 years ago. The program paired at-risk teens with officers for weekly activities, and the results were remarkable. Juvenile crime in their district had dropped by 30%. It was initiatives like these that had caught the attention of her superiors. Walking into the monthly leadership meeting, Captain Anderson could feel the eyes of her fellow officers. Word had spread that she was being considered for deputy chief, a position that no black woman had ever held in the department's history. But she wasn't thinking about making history. She was thinking about making change. During the meeting, she presented her latest community policing statistics. Her precinct had the lowest complaint rate and the highest citizen satisfaction scores in the city. The numbers spoke for themselves, but it was the stories behind them that mattered most. Like the time her officers organized a basketball tournament with local teenagers, or when they helped an elderly resident fix her broken fence after a storm. After the meeting, Captain Anderson met with her team to discuss upcoming community events. They were planning a neighborhood safety fair, complete with K-9 demonstrations, child ID kits, and free bike helmets for kids. She believed that building trust started with these small interactions. Later that afternoon, she received an email about her potential promotion. The evaluation committee wanted to review her full service record next week. Captain Anderson smiled, remembering her first day as a rookie officer, when some people didn't believe she'd last a month. Now, 15 years later, she was on the verge of the department's highest ranks. As she prepared to head home, Captain Anderson decided to stop by the local department store. She needed a new outfit for her upcoming presentation to the police commission. Little did she know that this simple shopping trip would set in motion events that would test everything she'd worked for, and ultimately change the department forever. Looking at her watch, she realized it was getting late. Tomorrow would be another busy day of meetings, patrol supervisions, and working on her proposal for expanding the youth mentorship program. But first, she needed that outfit. Something professional that reflected the leadership role she hoped to step into. With her badge tucked away and still in her business attire from an earlier community meeting, she headed to the store, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break. The glass doors of Carlton's department store slid open with a gentle whoosh as Captain Anderson stepped inside. The store's bright lights illuminated the polished floors, and the soft music playing overhead created a peaceful shopping atmosphere. She had been here countless times before. It was her go-to store for professional attire, and the staff usually greeted her with warm smiles. But something felt different today. As she made her way to the women's section, she noticed Officer Thompson from the neighboring precinct lingering nearby. He was supposed to be patrolling a different area, yet here he was, in full uniform, watching her with unsettling intensity. She recognized him from previous department meetings, though they'd never directly worked together. Captain Anderson tried to focus on the rack of blazers in front of her, running her fingers along the fine fabrics. She selected a deep navy one that caught her eye, but as she moved to the next rack, Officer Thompson's footsteps echoed behind her. Each time she changed aisles, he appeared at the end of it, pretending to inspect nearby displays. Other shoppers were starting to notice the odd dynamic. An elderly woman gave Captain Anderson a sympathetic look, while a young store clerk watched the situation with visible concern. Captain Anderson had experienced this kind of profiling before, but never from a fellow officer who should have known better. She picked up a cream-colored blouse to go with the blazer and headed to the fitting rooms. Through the mirror's reflection, she could see Officer Thompson speaking into his radio, though she couldn't make out what he was saying. The situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, but she refused to let it ruin her shopping trip. The blazer fit perfectly, exactly what she needed for her upcoming presentation. As she changed back into her clothes, she could hear Officer Thompson's boots pacing outside the fitting room area. A mixture of emotions washed over her: frustration, disappointment, and a deep sadness that even after 15 years on the force, wearing a badge, and breaking countless barriers, some people still saw her only through the lens of their prejudices. At the jewelry counter, she spotted a subtle pearl necklace that would complement her new outfit. The saleswoman was just finishing up the purchase when Officer Thompson moved closer, now openly staring at her hands as she signed the receipt. Captain Anderson carefully placed her department store card back in her wallet, making sure the movement was visible to everyone nearby. As she collected her shopping bags, she noticed Officer Thompson speaking to another uniformed officer who had just entered the store. They exchanged glances in her direction, and she could read their body language. They were planning something. Captain Anderson took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and headed toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She had nothing to hide, had paid for everything in her bags, and had the receipts to prove it. Yet somehow, she knew this shopping trip was about to become much more than just buying a new outfit. The weight of her police badge in her purse felt heavier than usual, and the exit doors seemed to get further away with each step. Just as she was about to step through the doors, she heard Officer Thompson's voice ring out through the store. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there." The other shoppers froze, and the store fell silent except for the overhead music that now seemed jarringly cheerful. Captain Anderson's hand instinctively moved toward her purse, where her badge was stored, but something told her this situation was about to become much more complicated than a simple misunderstanding. The security cameras blinked silently overhead, recording every moment of what was about to unfold. Little did Officer Thompson know, his next actions would not only change his life forever, but would spark a chain of events that would shake the entire police department to its core. Time seemed to slow down as Captain Anderson turned to face Officer Thompson. The store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and a small crowd of shoppers had already begun to gather, their phones discreetly raised to record what was happening. "Is there a problem, officer?" Captain Anderson kept her voice steady and professional, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. She was acutely aware of the stares from other customers, some concerned, others merely curious about the unfolding drama. "We've received reports of suspicious activity," Officer Thompson announced loudly, his voice echoing through the now quiet store. "I need to see your receipts and inspect your bags." His hand rested on his belt, an intimidation tactic she recognized from her years of service. Captain Anderson reached for her purse, maintaining eye contact with Officer Thompson. "I'm going to show you my identification first," she said calmly, though her heart was racing. "I'm Captain Anderson from the Oakland Police Department's 3rd Precinct." As she pulled out her badge, Officer Thompson scoffed. "Sure you are. Do you know how many fake badges we confiscate every year?" His partner shifted uncomfortably behind him, seemingly unsure about the situation. A store employee who had been helping Captain Anderson earlier stepped forward. "Sir, I can verify that she paid for everything. I personally processed her transaction." But Officer Thompson waved her off without even a glance. "Put the bags down and step away from them," Officer Thompson commanded, his voice growing more aggressive. The store manager had now appeared, clutching a handful of receipt printouts. "Officer, we have the security footage and all transaction records." "This is an ongoing police investigation." Officer Thompson cut him off. "Please step back." The manager retreated, exchanging worried glances with his staff. Captain Anderson could feel her professional life flashing before her eyes. 15 years of service, countless commendations, her pending promotion, all hanging by a thread because of one officer's prejudiced assumptions. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the precinct chief right now." "Put the phone down." Officer Thompson barked, taking a step forward. "That's an order." The crowd gasped as his hand moved toward his handcuffs. "I don't take orders from you, Officer Thompson," Captain Anderson replied firmly. "I am your superior officer, and you are making a serious mistake." She emphasized each word, hoping to break through his bias. Several onlookers had their phones out now, live streaming the incident. A young woman in the crowd spoke up. "This is wrong. We all saw her pay for everything." Others murmured in agreement, but Officer Thompson seemed to grow more determined with each passing second. Captain Anderson tried one more time. "Officer Thompson, think very carefully about your next action. Check with dispatch. Verify my identity. Don't let your assumptions lead you down a path you can't come back from." Instead of heeding her warning, Officer Thompson reached for his handcuffs. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for theft and impersonating a police officer." His partner finally spoke up. "Maybe we should call it in first." "She's stalling." Officer Thompson snapped. "This is textbook resistance." He moved toward Captain Anderson, handcuffs ready. The store's automatic doors whoosh open as more officers began arriving, likely drawn by the commotion over their radios. Captain Anderson stood her ground, dignity intact despite the growing spectacle. She could have resisted, could have fought back with the full force of her authority, but she knew that sometimes the most powerful response was to let someone's actions speak for themselves. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she looked Officer Thompson directly in the eyes and said quietly, so only he could hear, "Remember this moment, officer. Remember what you chose to see and what you chose to ignore. Because after today, nothing will be the same." The crowd's phones kept recording as Officer Thompson led her out of the store, unknowingly walking straight into a career-ending mistake that would soon make headlines across the country. The walk from the store entrance to Officer Thompson's patrol car felt like the longest journey of Captain Anderson's career. Every step on the asphalt parking lot echoed with the weight of injustice. The evening sun cast long shadows as curious shoppers gathered at the store's entrance, their phones recording every moment of this unfolding travesty. "Watch your head," Officer Thompson said with mock courtesy as he pushed her into the back seat of his patrol car. The words were professional, but his tone carried an edge of satisfaction that made her stomach turn. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists. He'd fastened them extra tight, a small act of spite that spoke volumes about his character. Through the patrol car's window, she could see her shopping bags being treated as evidence, each item pulled out and examined roughly despite the pristine store tags and receipts still attached. The store manager was trying to show the security footage on his tablet to other responding officers, but Officer Thompson quickly shut that down. "We'll review all evidence at the station," he announced loudly, though Captain Anderson knew that proper procedure would have been to review it immediately. She'd trained countless officers on proper protocol herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. As Officer Thompson climbed into the driver's seat, his partner finally spoke up again. "Maybe we should call the precinct first." But Officer Thompson cut him off sharply. "You're new to this. Trust me, I've seen this trick before. They all claim to be someone important." The car pulled out of the parking lot, and Captain Anderson caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. She sat up straighter, refusing to let this moment break her spirit. She thought about all the young officers she'd mentored, about the community members who trusted her, about the changes she'd fought so hard to implement in the department. "You know," she said calmly from the back seat, "when I teach at the academy, I always tell new officers that their body cameras are there to protect them as much as the public." She paused meaningfully. "Is your camera on, Officer Thompson?" His grip tightened on the steering wheel, but he didn't respond. In his haste to make the arrest, he'd forgotten to activate his body camera, another violation of department policy. The drive to the station was filled with tense silence, broken only by the crackle of the police radio. Through the mesh divider, Captain Anderson could see Officer Thompson checking his rearview mirror repeatedly, perhaps finally starting to question his actions. Outside the station, several officers were returning from their shifts. Captain Anderson recognized many faces, officers she'd worked with, trained, or mentored. Their shocked expressions as they watched their captain being led out of a patrol car in handcuffs told her that Officer Thompson's world was about to unravel. "I need to process a shoplifting suspect," Officer Thompson announced to the booking officer, still clinging to his narrative. But his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. The booking officer looked up and nearly dropped his coffee. "Captain Anderson, what's going on here?" The entire booking area fell silent. Officer Thompson's face began to pale as realization slowly dawned. A senior officer rushed forward. "Get those cuffs off her right now." The keys fumbled in Officer Thompson's suddenly shaking hands. As the handcuffs fell away, Captain Anderson rubbed her wrists but maintained her composure. The station erupted into activity. Phone started ringing as news of the incident spread. Officers who had witnessed her arrival were already pulling up security footage from the store on their computers. The police chief had been notified and was on his way. Captain Anderson stood in the middle of it all, her dignity intact despite the ordeal. She watched as Officer Thompson was immediately pulled aside by internal affairs officers who had seemingly materialized out of nowhere. His career was imploding in real time, all because he couldn't see past his own prejudices. As she was led to the chief's office, she heard snippets of conversation about viral videos, news crews already gathering outside, and words like suspension and investigation being thrown around. The next few hours would change everything, not just for Officer Thompson, but for the entire department. The police station buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Within an hour of Captain Anderson's wrongful arrest, the video had exploded across social media. People were sharing it thousands of times per minute, and news vans had already set up camp outside the station, their satellite dishes reaching into the darkening sky like metal trees. Inside the chief's office, Captain Anderson sat calmly as she watched the store's security footage with the police chief and two internal affairs investigators. The footage was crystal clear, showing her normal shopping experience, every purchase, every receipt, and Officer Thompson's increasingly aggressive behavior. "Look at this timestamp," one investigator noted, pointing to the screen. "He didn't even wait for dispatch to verify your identity." The footage showed Officer Thompson ignoring standard procedures, brushing aside store employees trying to help, and escalating a situation that never should have existed. The chief's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News organizations, the mayor's office, civil rights groups, everyone wanted answers. The store manager sent over all the receipts and additional camera angles. An assistant announced, hurrying in with a thick folder. "And there's more. People from the store are sending in their cell phone videos. We've got at least 12 different angles of the incident." Meanwhile, in another room, Officer Thompson sat sweating as internal affairs officers dug through his service record. A pattern began to emerge. Complaints that had been filed but somehow buried, concerns from fellow officers that had gone unaddressed, and a troubling history of similar incidents that had been swept under the rug. "Chief," called another officer from the doorway, "you need to see this." He held up his phone, showing social media posts flooding in from people sharing their own experiences with Officer Thompson. A black business owner describing being harassed during routine inspections. A college student recounting a hostile traffic stop. A grandmother telling how she'd been followed around the same department store just last week. The story was growing bigger by the minute. News helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights occasionally flooding the windows. Protesters had begun gathering outside the station, their chants for justice echoing through the halls. Captain Anderson's phone lit up with message after message. Support from fellow officers, community leaders, and citizens she'd helped over the years. The same community she'd worked so hard to build trust with was now rallying behind her. The department store just released an official statement, someone announced. The room fell quiet as they read it aloud. The statement was clear and damning. Security footage showing Captain Anderson's full shopping trip, timestamps of her purchases, and multiple employee statements confirming her proper behavior and Officer Thompson's unwarranted actions. In the building's lobby, reporters were interviewing witnesses from the store. The elderly woman who had given Captain Anderson that sympathetic look was there, voice shaking with anger as she described what she'd seen. The young store clerk had brought the original receipts, proving every purchase. Even Officer Thompson's partner had come forward, unable to stay quiet about what he witnessed. Back in the chief's office, Internal Affairs had pulled up Officer Thompson's bodycam history. Though he'd failed to activate his camera during Captain Anderson's arrest, his previous footage told a story of its own. The timestamps revealed a pattern of selective enforcement, of cameras conveniently turned off during certain encounters, of subtle hostilities that had gone unchecked for too long. Captain Anderson watched it all unfold with a mixture of sadness and determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever faced similar treatment but lacked the badge and rank to fight back. It was about the changes still needed in the department she'd served faithfully for 15 years. As the night wore on, the chief made a decision. "We're holding a press conference first thing tomorrow morning," he announced. "The public deserves answers, and they're going to get them." He looked at Captain Anderson with respect and regret. "And we're going to make this right." The truth was out now, impossible to ignore or hide. Officer Thompson's actions had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and through it would come changes that would reshape the entire department. The police department's largest conference room was packed to capacity 1 week after the incident. The disciplinary hearing was about to begin, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Officer Thompson sat at one end of the long table, his once crisp uniform now seeming to hang loosely on his shoulders, his face drawn from sleepless nights. At the other end sat the review board, 5 senior officers from different precincts, 2 civilian oversight committee members, and a representative from the police union. Captain Anderson's chair remained empty. She had already given her testimony the previous day with grace and professionalism that had left many in tears. "Let's begin," announced the board chairperson, shuffling through a thick stack of papers. "Officer Thompson, we're here to review the events of last week and your overall conduct during your time with the department." The evidence was overwhelming. First came the security footage from the department store, showing every angle of the incident. Then came the witness statements. Store employees, shoppers, even other police officers who had arrived at the scene. Each account added another brick to the wall of evidence against Officer Thompson. But it wasn't just about one incident. As the hearing progressed, more people came forward to testify. A young teacher described being pulled over 6 times in 1 month, each time by Officer Thompson, never receiving a ticket, but always being treated with suspicion. A local business owner shared security footage of Officer Thompson conducting unnecessary, routine checks at his store while ignoring other businesses on the same street. In the past 3 years, the Internal Affairs investigator reported, Officer Thompson conducted 253 random stops. Our analysis shows a disturbing pattern. The statistics displayed on the screen told a damning story of targeted harassment and profiling. Officer Thompson's former partners were called to testify. Some spoke of trying to report his behavior through proper channels. only to have their concerns dismissed. Others admitted to staying silent when they should have spoken up, their guilt now evident in their voices. During a break in the proceedings, conversations in the hallway revealed how deeply this case had affected the department. Young officers discussed how it had changed their perspective on the responsibility they carried with their badges. Veterans talked about the need for better oversight and the courage to speak up when they saw something wrong. When the hearing resumed, Officer Thompson's own body camera footage was reviewed. Though he had failed to activate it during Captain Anderson's arrest, his previous recordings showed a clear pattern of behavior. The contrast between his tone and conduct with different citizens was stark and undeniable. The police union representative, usually quick to defend officers, sat in uncomfortable silence. The evidence was too clear, the pattern too obvious, the violation of trust too severe to defend. As the sun began to set outside the conference room windows, casting long shadows across the faces of everyone present, the board prepared to announce their decision. Officer Thompson stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented today, the chairperson began, "This board has reached a unanimous decision. Officer Thompson's actions show a clear pattern of misconduct, bias, and abuse of power. Effective immediately, his employment with this department is terminated." But that wasn't all. The board also recommended a full review of all cases Officer Thompson had been involved with during his career. Civil rights violations charges would be filed with the district attorney's office. His police certification would be revoked, ensuring he could never wear a badge again in any jurisdiction. As Officer Thompson was escorted out of the building, he passed by the Wall of Honor, where Captain Anderson's recent commendation hung. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. One career built on trust and service ending in disgrace, while another stood as an example of everything a police officer should be. Outside, the evening news crews were already setting up their cameras. This story had become more than just a local incident. It had become a symbol of accountability and change. The department's swift and decisive action would be reported across the country, sending a clear message that no badge could be used as a shield for prejudice. 6 months after the department store incident, the police headquarters buzzed with a different kind of energy. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the newly renovated training center as Captain Anderson, now Deputy Chief Anderson, stood before a group of fresh-faced police academy graduates. "Your badge isn't just a symbol of authority," she told them, her voice carrying years of experience and hard-earned wisdom. "It's a symbol of trust. And trust must be earned every single day, with every single interaction." The room was silent, every rookie officer hanging on her words. The changes in the department were visible everywhere. New body cameras caught the light, top-of-the-line models that activated automatically when officers left their vehicles. On the walls, posters announced upcoming community engagement events and bias awareness training sessions. But the real changes ran much deeper. In the break room, officers of different backgrounds sat together, openly discussing challenging situations they'd faced and how to handle them better. The old us versus them mentality was being replaced by a spirit of community partnership. Even veteran officers were embracing the change, sharing stories of how the new approach had made their jobs not just easier, but more rewarding. Remember last week's community basketball tournament? One officer said to another as they grabbed coffee, "Those kids who used to run when they saw us now wave hello. That's what real policing looks like." The department store incident had become a mandatory case study in police academies across the country. But they didn't just study what went wrong. They studied how the department responded, how transparency and accountability had turned a crisis into an opportunity for positive change. Deputy Chief Anderson walked through the station, stopping to chat with officers and civilian staff alike. She passed by the wall where commendation letters from the community were now prominently displayed. One caught her eye. A thank you note from a grandmother who had been helped by an officer during a minor traffic accident. "He treated me with such respect," the letter read. This is what building trust looks like. In the computer lab, officers were completing their monthly implicit bias training. The new program, developed with input from community leaders and civil rights experts, went beyond simple do's and don'ts. It helped officers understand their own biases and gave them practical tools to make better decisions in the field. Outside, community members freely walked in and out of the station's new public resource center. Gone were the days of intimidating security checks and cold institutional atmospheres. The space had been redesigned to be welcoming, with comfortable seating areas and helpful staff ready to assist with everything from filing reports to getting information about community programs. During lunch, Deputy Chief Anderson met with her Community Advisory Board, a diverse group of local residents who provided regular feedback on police policies and practices. They were discussing plans for an upcoming town hall meeting where officers would sit down with residents to address concerns and share progress. "You've created real change here," one board member told her. "My grandson used to be scared of police officers. Now he wants to be one when he grows up." The afternoon brought a visit from police chiefs from other cities, eager to learn about the department's transformation. As Deputy Chief Anderson led them through the station, she showed them the new training facilities, the Community Engagement Center, and the transparent complaint investigation process. The hardest part, she explained, wasn't changing policies. It was changing minds. But when people see that accountability makes everyone safer, officers and citizens alike, they get on board. At day's end, as she prepared to leave, Deputy Chief Anderson passed by the department store where it all began. The store had become an unexpected partner in police training, offering their space for community meetings and helping to train officers in customer service and conflict resolution. Walking to her car, she smiled at a group of children playing nearby. They waved enthusiastically, not seeing a uniform or a badge, but someone they trusted to keep their community safe. This, she thought, was what justice looked like, not just punishing wrongdoing, but building something better in its place. The sun set on another day of progress, small steps adding up to big changes. The department's transformation had become a model for others across the country, proving that with courage, commitment, and compassion, real change was possible.